And welcome back. And obviously, we have changed our rundown significantly given the realities of what happened earlier today in New York. What was first reported as, possibly a road rage situation, certainly translated and transformed into something far different. It is now being considered a deliberate act and an act of terror. 8 people dead, more than a dozen injured. What was a disturbed person whose motivations we will learn more of in the coming days, if not even hours. Hopped a curb on the west side and for 18 blocks plowed down a bike path, taking out cyclists and joggers in his wake. And at the end, as I mentioned, the tragic realities. Let's bring in our panel right now. Jerica Richardson, former spokesperson for Mayor de Blasio, and also U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara. Richard St. Paul here, Republican strategist and also former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. Andrew Whitman, who you've already met as well. To me, Jerica, was an interesting thing. Listen, I'm a big believer in stiff upper lip. We've seen this in terror attacks, not just here, but abroad. I remember in London, they went about their business. The metro was running before the same day of an attack. Right. But we have a parade scheduled in 45 minutes in the Village. We all know, for those New Yorkers, it's a huge event, especially with good weather for the Halloween parade. But think about it. You have people in masks and everything else and costumes, and it will go on, just as the marathon is planned for this weekend will go on as well. I get it. I think I'd do the same thing, but so close to a terror attack where there still are many unanswered questions, how difficult is that? And you worked for this mayor, but for any mayor for that matter, or any police department, to navigate the risk and the reward and the messaging, and that we've got it under control. That's got to be a tough equation to figure out on the fly.
Absolutely. It's definitely a tough situation, but I think the one thing to keep in mind is constant communication. You have to constantly talk to your citizens, let them know that you are running all the traps. I think it's helpful to always have your brass, your law enforcement there, and to let folks know as much information as you are able to provide them with, so that you're keeping them in the loop. I think the biggest thing is also to make sure that you are becoming a calming factor, right? So communicating effectively, constantly, and then sharing information with the public as you have it. I think that's critical.
You know, Richard, again, many unanswered questions. There was obviously a question that we know there was a rented vehicle and with a Home Depot truck, if you will, that was used to plow down the folks. There will be questions. Remember, after 9/11, I'm not connoting the two at all, people who rented planes or learned how to fly on planes, and then that there was going to be more of a database to measure. Apparently, the NYPD and other agencies have been trying to do this, but there's only so much one can do. But when we look at the man who's right now, who drove the vehicle, who's right now being both treated and then will be detained and obviously charged in this, as Andrew said, we know he's a 29-year-old man who was residing in Tampa, Florida, green card status, reportedly yelled Al Akbar when he exited the vehicle. We don't know how or when he was radicalized or to what degree. Police believe he acted in the lone wolf capacity, but the president has said a non-inflammatory statement, just saying not in the U.S. Obviously, it did happen in the U.S. Do you expect a broader conversation once again about certain populations in this country as to who can gain entry into this country, who is or isn't Americans? This was the president's statement in the minutes after the attack, once the information became public. Will we have this national debate all over again?
Look, we're constantly making strides in terms of trying to make the United States safe. And that starts from the federal level and tracking who comes in and out of this country, something that state and locals don't have those type of resources to track or even govern who comes in and out of this country. So it is a combination of federal, state, local, and of course of the citizens of this country to come together and figure out a plan in which we can secure ourselves. Because if you hear the saying, you know, if you see something, say something, that starts with us that's our participation as citizens. On a local, state, and federal level, we expect our law enforcement agencies to do what they can to stop people from coming to this country to commit these
But you
crimes.
know, Andrew, to Richard's point, I know that's going to be the common theme, which is true. I mean, it's like motherhood and apple pie. What do we do to make ourselves a more perfect and more protected union? However, what we've seen abroad is they've accepted certain ugly realities that you can't stop with all intents and purposes. Somebody wants to do something with their vehicle, and you listed, I think in detail, I think it gave a lot of scope to where it's happened in so many different places in this world, and that doesn't even talk about in Africa and other locations, just in Europe. But I have a sense that this discussion will change here starting tomorrow for a whole host of reasons. Roy Moore was on the Hill today. Roy Moore is the Republican senator from Alabama, or soon to be, and he, when asked, he had once said he didn't believe a Muslim American, born and raised in this country, congressman from Minnesota, ought to be able to hold office in the country because of his faith. These conversations and these kind of debates, I think, will get stirred up again by today. And in the climate we're in, with some of the questions and distractions that are going on, I just have a sense that it's going to just get, we're going to focus on the wrong thing.
Well, let me add some detail, and that might give some indication as to where this is going. The suspect, Sayfullo Saipov, 29 years old, came to the U.S. in 2010, reportedly from Uzbekistan. We do not know his religious background, but Uzbekistan is about 97% Muslim.
But it wasn't one of the 8 countries, if I remember right, that was on the travel
I don't
ban.
believe it.
Right.
I don't believe it was. One other note here, that intelligence officials are saying they had no prior warning or sense that attack was pending through the normal channels. So this was clearly, if in fact it was terrorism as we believe it was, it does appear to be one of the lone wolf attacks that you were talking about, which then complicates the process of how you defend a country against something like that.
Right. So, Jerica, you said something interesting to me. It's constant communication. So,
Right.
the public, and again, you saw shoulder to shoulder. A mayor and a governor certainly will never be confused for BFFs. But you saw the police commissioner there. You saw the Manhattan district attorney there. You saw the FDNY head who gave the reports on the status of the casualties and fatalities attached to this. That's what we expect to see more. The public should expect throughout the weekend. In a weekend that includes the New York Marathon, we're going to start to see those faces repeatedly telling us as much information as they possibly come across.
Exactly, and they need to show a united front. I think this is a tragic situation, but one thing that is important to note when we think about New York is when these things have happened in the past, people have rallied around these things and come together, and united front is something that we need to maintain. And I think it's also important when these things happen to think about the NYPD and the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force that we have here, and how many incidents happen that they are able to thwart. So we don't hear about them every day. We do hear about some of these situations happening, but New York really has been strong on combating terrorism, both here in New York City and across the globe. And many of our law enforcement officials work hard every single day to thwart these attempts, both here and abroad.
And the counterterrorism unit of the NYPD is the envy of the world. It's not just, parochialism saying this. Everybody acknowledges it's better than many international counterterrorism for countries. And it really emanated here, obviously, in a post 9/11 New York and America. Okay, we'll have much more on this, but also another busy day, certainly, that was not just relegated to the tragedy we saw in New York. Whereas we go to break, we're going to hear some voices of people who were there and their reactions as the situation unfolded.
I hear a crazy noise coming from behind me because I'm waiting at the light to cross the street, and the light, this light why is it taking so long to change? All the cars are flying by, there's no traffic, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I hear all the noise, and when I go back and I look, I see, a truck a few more blocks down going down the bike path, and for some reason I went that way, and when I went that way, I seen a couple of bodies laying right there in the bike path, and when I was looking, seeing if there's anybody else, I heard gunshots, and there was about 9 or 10 gunshots going off, and I seen cops ducking down. A lot of police came running towards the way up where I was. They didn't know what was going on. They were confused just as much as I'm pretty sure everybody else was.
What I saw was that the driver, he didn't look like he was bleeding or anything per se, but he did have a noticeable limp as he was getting out of his car. He did look like he was dragging his foot a little bit, and he was screaming in the street. He looked frustrated, panicked, confused. From there, a whole bunch of customers started running past me. A whole bunch of people came running past my way, yelling, "He's got a gun, he's got a gun."